Ladies and gentlemen, as we head into the final quarter of a very, very difficult 2021, there were some silver linings we must talk about. If I were to point out some of the events on the policy-making front, I would unflinchingly select 3 events. Air India privatization, efforts towards the listing of the Life Insurance Corporation, and the national monetization policy. All 3 initiatives that can change the direction of this great nation. Let's dwell deeper. I'd like to invite on dais Gulveen Aulakh, Senior Assistant Editor, Mint, who is now going to be in conversation with Shri Tuhin Kanta Pandey, Honorable Secretary, Department of Investment and Public Asset Management, Ministry of Finance, Government of India, who is joining us virtually. Namaskar, sir, and a very, very warm welcome to you.
Good evening, sir. Thank you so much for joining us. Ladies and gentlemen, we have the Secretary of Divestment and Public Asset Management, Mr. Tuhin Kanta Pandey, with us. From his busy schedule, he's managed to give us time. We're very thankful to him. So we very quickly will get into the whole discussion that we have today. The pandemic has changed a lot for everyone, including investors and the government. How has it changed the way the government does divestment and asset monetization?
I think, of course, we had several rounds of pandemic, as you know. In this very financial year, we had, right after the budget, Delta wave, second wave, and towards the end of the last quarter, we had Omicron, the third wave. So obviously, this impacted, like many other activities, strategic disinvestment particularly, because that's one where we require a lot of engagement with investors, which includes, due diligence process, even going to site inspections and a lot of due diligence work. Everything cannot be performed virtually. And I think even the advisors, etc., were also impacted while the waves were on. So to that extent, several of the transactions got delayed. But then, as soon as the waves, waned, they have been brought back on the rails. So we did have an impact, but it's not that we are not in this disinvestment track. We are back on the track.
So there is, of course, this big powerhouse that you're bringing to the markets, LIC. Everybody has their eyes on it. Is the government ready to go ahead, or are there any challenges that you're facing?
The government is ready to go ahead. Honorable Finance Minister also indicated earlier on, and as indicated by her, we brought in the DRHP on time, and we have also got, subject to certain observations, SEBI's go ahead also. And, December financials that needs to be incorporated will also be incorporated in the addendum to DRHP. We are now watching the markets closely. As you know, we had these unanticipated events, which are of a very wide global nature. And this has impacted markets around the globe, including Indian market. LIC IPO is a large IPO. We wanted to go off well. Of course, there is a lot of enthusiasm. And in terms of the timings, we are watching the market closely, and we will surely bring it as soon as we feel that we will comfortably carry it on.
So how is the government handling the investor sentiment around the IPOs particularly? Because the challenges of crude and inflation seem to be getting more tedious. What's your view on that?
No, those are the important headwinds, no doubt, generally for the markets as well. The crude basket, the commodity prices. But at the same time, we have this IPO to do. And LIC is an organization which is also quite sound organization, and it's something which has been built over a period, and it has got excellent track record. It's going forward, it will have a big future as well. So therefore, this is something which is not really directly impacted by the oil prices of things. But yes, generally, the market sentiments is impacted, and that's why we are closely watching as regards the timing.
So the Russia-Ukraine war is a surprise factor for divestment overall, not just for the IPO. What kind of feedback are you getting from investors? We have a whole room full of them here. What are the concerns that they are sharing for the overall strategy for the government?
This is there is something which is, you said investors generally or investors specifically for LIC IPO. At the moment, I think our engagement with the investors, potential investors for the LIC IPO has been going on. And this engagement has continued notwithstanding the crisis in Europe. It's very, very positive overall. We've engaged, the LIC management has been engaging relentlessly with investors around the globe. And people have shown keen interest in LIC, and they've tried to know, and they've tried to analyze, they've fielding questions. There's tremendous amount of interest for the LIC. And of course, as you know that, this is a process, iterative process, which will a feedback loop, which will lead to ultimately our deciding on the timings and then moving forward. So I would say that so far as LIC is concerned, the mood is upbeat. Of course, there is a bit of headwinds in terms of people looking at Fed. Of course, we know that certain policy stance of Fed as well, but nevertheless, people are waiting for the mid-March meeting, and also people are also watching how the conflict unfolds, what are the likely impact. I think everyone is watching, and the market is taking care of that. We have also seen a certain amount of recovery in Indian markets last few days.
So geopolitical tensions are on the rise. We're all aware of it. But how does that affect the government's policy on privatization specifically, getting more private sector money into public sector PSUs, for both, not just for the ongoing privatization, but also for future prospects? Government has a separate policy on privatization completely. Where does that leave the government now?
I think that the policy of privatization is more stable because it's not, it's a little bit of a medium to long term. Because something, when we are saying changing of management control, it's not really so much with the vicissitudes of the market in general as it happens in share market sales in the market. Because that market goes up and down fairly quickly. In case of privatization, the transactions, they take a lot of time. The reason is that the government is exiting the management control. And when it happens, the organizations are gone into in great detail because the new investors or the acquirer will come into management. So they will look at the due diligence. The process itself is, it's an open competitive bidding process. It's not a process where we can actually pick and choose. It's, advertised, and then the people participate, and then we have an expression of interest. For example, today itself, we have received multiple expression of interest on HLL Life Care. This was actually announced some time back, and our advertisement, open advertisement had been issued. And today was the last date. And we have received a multiple expression of interest, and now it will move to the second stage. In the second stage, you go through the due diligence process, and then you negotiate finalize the share purchase agreements, and then the bidding takes place. And finally, when the bidder is announced and it crosses the benchmark price, we call it reserve price, then we are able to announce the highest bidder, and then following which certain other approvals are taken. If open offer is involved in a listed company, that it's done as well, and the transaction concludes. So you can appreciate that this is actually any M&A transactions. It's a slightly longish transaction. It takes about a fair amount of time. And there the intent is to change the management control. And that, I think, is fundamentally far deeper reforms than the reform merely for listing and dilution of the stake sale. Because there, the efficiency that we talk about, private sector efficiencies, the nimbleness, the capacity to respond to the situation, the capital infusion, bringing in new technology and management practices, that we know that private sector is more capable of than the public sector, that comes into play. And that leads to greater economic and job potential of the organization than otherwise would have been possible. So therefore, those reforms are continuing as for the new PSC policy, which was announced in February 2021. And several of those transactions are on the table, and new pipeline will come as well. Of course, the timing will depend upon our capacity to handle the feasibility, the investor interest. And as we are able to, together as an ecosystem, able to conclude the transactions in a fairly acceptable way in terms of both investors as well as the government, there will be a greater momentum and greater acceptability to carry on more number of transactions. And we can actually then really, say that the government is trying to get out of business as much as possible, which is the intent of the new PSC policy.
So you've mentioned reforms. Now, for the private sector, for investors that would be participating in privatization, the key ask is always and has always been predictability and stability. What kind of a roadmap can the government provide to investors, to such investors, in the long term? Because that's what the government is looking at, long-term investor possibility into privatization.
I think that is extremely important. Because as I said, that I think one of the main crux of privatization program is not merely to actually garner resources for the fiscal, because that can be even achieved in various other ways as well. This is a more difficult way of raising resources by way of privatization, because as I said, that these transactions are fairly complex, long-term, and there are also legal challenges all the way in these transactions, which have to be also faced, they have to be encountered and they have to be handled. Be that as it may, these are basically aimed at, raising the economic and the job, generation potential of those enterprises. Because unless and until we use the capital, unless and until we also, increase manufacturing in India, unless and until we have productivity increase, unless and until we get into the newer and newer technologies, because the older technologies will go by the wayside. And that sort of decision-making, technology, infusion of capital, going to the market, bringing in best of the, new practices, that is the kind of momentum needs to be imparted to some of our organizations, which are no doubt good, but what we have to say is how far they can go ahead. That's the message for that privatization, and I think that is much more than merely raising resources.
But what about reforms for the government? You've mentioned capacity building. That is an area where the government would want to work more on so that more privatization can happen. What's the playbook for the government here?
I think You have said it rightly that we need really capacity building of not only in DPAM per se, but also in all the ministries, because we work as a team. It's not really an effort by one individual or one ministry. It is the whole of the government approach we have, and we have collegial processes and interministerial groups and others. So we require the capacity built up over, across the departments. If they're able to appreciate that how we can structure those transactions, how we can build up those transactions, which will be, for which it will be possible for us to go ahead. See, the employees are also extremely important, because ultimately it is the employees which are another bedrock of every organization. And to that extent, they will get newer possibilities in their organization. They will get more enthused. And I think if they are able to watch some of the other organizations which have been privatized doing well, they would also, gauge the fact that, that some of the fears, which they might have, we would be able to dispel those fears in terms of, job protection or things like that. Because ultimately, it's a sustainable employment which will remain. Beyond a point, nobody, not the government, nobody can actually, sustain an employment which is not sustained by the market forces, by the marketability of the products, by the profitability of the enterprises. Beyond a point, you cannot subsidize. It has to be, organization has to sustain on their own. They should be capable of running on their own. So therefore, it's extremely important that all these productive forces are unleashed if we have to grow and grow fast.
Great. So what about asset monetization? That is, again, one of the top priorities of the government, and that falls under your remit. Is government giving adequate incentives for investors and fund houses to be in India for the long term?
Again, I would say the asset monetization is again a whole of the government approach, not necessarily pertaining to my department. I think all of the departments have to come together, and that's how the National Monetization Plan was drawn up. Every department has chipped in, particularly roads and railways, powers, and you have food and public distribution in terms of the silos, port, airports, ports. The idea is to actually increase the capex. If we have a capex-driven, investment cycle as the core of our economic growth model currently, some of the role has to be played by monetization pipeline, because you can actually raise those resources upfront. If you want to create a number of roads, you can actually complete the roads in few stretches. You are able to, give tolling rights and other rights to the, it's basically in the asset monetization model, you're not really transferring ownership, but you transfer the rights. And once you give the rights, you can actually monetize those rights upfront and use that money to further increase the capex. So this is one way of raising money while investing the same amount of money. So it's not a, direct receipts to the government, but it is a very important impetus to the economy, where a lot of capex is taking place, where it is being generated from some of the investors who would be interested in, investing in InvITs, REITs, TOTs, or even, for example, PPPs. So these are the kind of structures, well-structured, transactions, which constitute asset monetization of different kinds, where the possibility of investors to come in is there, which will help the raise resources, and those resources will help those organizations to build up further capital and put it in capital and create more assets. So that's the model I think many countries around the world are adopting, and India is no exception.
But so what about the targets? We have a good, healthy target of 88,000 crores for monetization for this year. How close do you think we are of achieving that?
I think it's likely to be achieved, because it may not be exactly in the proportion in which it was indicated that it will be done. Because some departments have, have gone ahead much faster. For example, I think to my understanding, about 17,000 crore has already been achieved by the Ministry of Road Transport and Highways in TOTs, in InvITs, as well as on securitization. And there are certain about 1,000 crore has also been done by Ministry of Surface Transport. Then there is the airport, the 1,400 crore of airport PPP has been done. And there is also something which has been done from the Food and Public Distribution Department. Something has been done from the railways. But a lot has been done by the mining, especially the coal department, where they have brought in an MMD, the MDO model on a large scale. Apart from the mining blocks which have been auctioned, in the existing organizations also, the MDO, instead of directly investing, they are investing through MDO model, and where I think close to 50,000 crores worth of contracts have been awarded. So if you really look at it, everything put together, there is a good prospect of achieving the target. And of course, we have got a 1 lakh crore target for the next year, in which the different ministries have also to again start chipping in right from the beginning.
All right, so land monetization still remains a challenge. Of course, the National Land Monetization Corporation has been instituted, the cabinet has given an approval. But in your opinion, how well will this entity be able to navigate the challenges that are normally faced by any government department in monetizing land assets?
I think this is something which was needed, and because we really didn't have organizational capacity in any ministry in order to do that, because you know that basically central government is not really land intensive government. It's the state governments which have got most of the land, and they have their also organizations to handle it. This is something where a lot of CPSCs where we were lying closed or under closure haven't been able to close down also, because they have, although the liabilities have been extinguished, they have not been able to dispose of the assets, particularly land assets. And one of the important constraints which we studied, we found that there was little capacity in this. Similarly, we may have certain agencies, certain areas where it's possible to actually use the land for much more productive purposes, including urban renewal. To some extent, Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs has done a lot in Delhi, where they have used that land and used the FAR to create a number of dwelling units at free of cost to the government because of the use of the FAR. But similar such things have not been done in many other cities where this land might exist. Now, so this is an organization which is actually, to start with, will be able to bring in the capacities that we have been talking about. And they would be able to actually get to service some of those requests from different other agencies and ministries to do that. And if they are able to succeed in concluding the transaction, they can always grow. To start with, they can start small and then they can grow. But this is something which has an authorized capital of 5,000 crores, so it's potentially, it could be a big organization. But what matters clearly is that we are able to bring in the best of the capacities into this organization while we do that. Department of Public Enterprises have been interested going forward to set up this organization.
All right. So my last question to you before we let you go is that the government has always been receptive of investor suggestions, be it ongoing or future transactions. What kind of message would you like to give investors here who have joined us? What would you want to convey to them?
No, as I said, that we have different windows in which the investors are getting in. There is a disinvestment window, typically listing opportunity like LIC or many other opportunities that we might have in dilution of stake sale. Then the second window is, of course, privatization, where the strategic disinvestment with management control takes place through a pipeline, which we regularly advertise. It's available on our website. We also interact with investors and roadshows and so on. And the third, of course, is the asset monetization window, where a number of ministries also collaborate, and Niti Aayog also takes care of broader monitoring role in bringing the ministries together. So all these three possibilities are there where this thing is there. This is not to count for tremendous other opportunities that exist, whether it is PLI scheme for direct capital formation, or in general the capital formation and this thing in the green field or brown field, or in other IBC related kind of a thing where investors are there. So there are different opportunities. Issue is that a capital scarce country like India needs to optimize the capital, and we need to have our capital generating more output wherever we can, and that will add to the growth and employment.
Great. Thank you so much for your time, sir. We really appreciate it. Ladies and gentlemen, let's give him a warm round of applause, please.